deep beneath the sands of Iraq, in forgotten chambers where sunlight has never reached, lie clay tablets that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about human civilization. These aren't just ancient shopping lists or tax records. These are the forbidden stories, the suppressed myths, the dangerous truths that someone desperately wanted to bury forever. Tonight, we're diving into one of the most explosive archaeological cover-ups in modern history. Because what if I told you that the very foundation myths of our civilization, the stories that shaped Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, weren't original at all? What if they were copies, carefully edited versions of far older Sumerian tales that contained details so shocking, so world-shattering, that they had to be hidden from public view? For the past 3 years, I've been tracking down missing Mesopotamian texts, following paper trails through dusty museum basements, and uncovering a pattern of suppression that reaches into the highest levels of academic institutions. What I found will make you question everything you thought you knew about the ancient world. But here's the thing that should terrify you most. It's not just that these texts were hidden, it's that they're still being hidden today, right now, as you watch this video. Major museums have entire collections locked away in storage facilities that researchers aren't allowed to access. Universities have banned professors from publishing translations that contradict established narratives. And when independent scholars try to bring this evidence to light, they face career destruction, funding cuts, and sometimes worse. This isn't some wild conspiracy theory. This is documented fact, and by the end of this investigation, you'll see the evidence with your own eyes. We'll examine the actual tablets, read the suppressed translations, and discover why the stories carved in cuneiform script over 4,000 years ago are considered too dangerous for the modern world to handle. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, because we're about to uncover the hidden scrolls of Babylon, and trust me, once you see what's been kept from you, there's no going back. Let me start with something that will blow your mind. In 1872, a young British archaeologist named George Smith was working in the basement of the British Museum, cataloguing thousands of clay tablets that had been shipped from Mesopotamia. These tablets had been sitting in storage for years, largely ignored, considered nothing more than ancient bureaucratic records. But Smith noticed something strange about one particular tablet. The cuneiform symbols told a story about a great flood, a man who built a massive boat, and animals saved 2 by 2. Sound familiar? This wasn't just similar to the biblical flood narrative. It was nearly identical, except for one crucial detail. This Mesopotamian version was written down over 1,000 years before the oldest known Hebrew texts. Smith's discovery sent shockwaves through Victorian society. Here was proof that one of the Bible's most famous stories had been borrowed, adapted, possibly even plagiarized from a much older source. The tablet he found was part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, specifically the story of Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah. But here's where it gets interesting. Smith's translation was immediately controversial. The Church of England was outraged. Jewish scholars demanded clarification. Islamic authorities called it Western propaganda. And within months, Smith found himself under intense pressure to revise his findings, to soften the implications, to make the parallels less obvious. What happened next reveals a pattern that continues to this day. Smith's initial translation was pulled from circulation. A revised version appeared that emphasized the differences rather than the similarities. The most damaging passages were relegated to academic footnotes that only specialists would ever read. The general public received a sanitized version that preserved religious sensitivities while burying the explosive truth. And this was just the beginning, because the flood story wasn't the only parallel Smith discovered. As he continued translating, he he found Sumerian versions of the Garden of Eden story, complete with a tree of knowledge and a serpent. He found tales of divine beings creating humans from clay. He found accounts of a great tower built to reach the heavens, struck down by angry gods. Every major biblical narrative had a Sumerian predecessor, often multiple versions, each more detailed and explicit than the Hebrew adaptations that came later. But by 1876, Smith was dead, officially from dysentery, contracted during a research expedition to Syria. He was only 36 years old at the peak of his career, with access to materials that could have revolutionized our understanding of ancient history. His death meant that thousands of tablets remained untranslated, their secrets locked away in cuneiform script that few scholars could read. And those who could read it found themselves facing the same pressures Smith had encountered. Translate carefully, emphasize continuity, not contradiction. Don't rock the boat. This brings us to the first major suppression technique used to hide these dangerous texts: selective translation. When you control what gets translated and how it gets interpreted, you control the narrative. The most explosive revelations can be buried in academic jargon, dismissed as mythology, or simply never translated at all. Let me show you how this works in practice. In the 1922nd, teams of archaeologists excavated the ancient city of Nippur, one of Sumer's most important religious centers. They uncovered thousands of tablets, including complete libraries of mythological texts. Among these was a series of tablets describing the Anunnaki, divine beings who, according to Sumerian mythology, came from the heavens to earth. Now, here's where it gets wild. The Sumerian texts don't describe the Anunnaki as metaphorical or symbolic figures. They describe them in concrete, physical terms. They detail their technology, their genetic experiments, their conflicts with each other, and their interactions with early humans. These aren't vague spiritual allegories. These are detailed historical accounts, written as if the scribes were recording actual events. But when these tablets were translated for public consumption, something extraordinary happened. The physical descriptions became spiritual manifestations. The technology became divine miracles. The genetic experiments became acts of creation. Every concrete detail was transformed into abstract religious symbolism. Why? Because the alternative was too disturbing to contemplate. If the Sumerian accounts were taken at face value, they suggested that human civilization had been shaped by outside intervention, that our myths and religions were garbled memories of actual encounters with beings possessing advanced technology. This wasn't just academically controversial, it was existentially threatening. It challenged the fundamental assumptions about human development, religious authority, and our place in the universe. So the evidence was repackaged, sanitized, made safe for public consumption. But the original tablets still exist. The untranslated texts still sit in museum storage facilities, and occasionally, independent researchers manage to gain access and discover what's really written there. Dr. Zecharia Sitchin was one such researcher. In the 1972nd, he began publishing translations of Sumerian texts that mainstream academia had either ignored or deliberately mistranslated. His interpretations were immediately attacked as sensationalist, unscholarly, pseudoscientific. He was banned from academic conferences, denied access to research materials, and dismissed as a fringe theorist. But here's what they didn't want you to know. Sitchin's translations were often more accurate than the official versions. When independent linguists checked his work against the original cuneiform, they found that he was reading the tablets correctly. The mainstream translations had been deliberately altered to fit predetermined conclusions. This pattern repeats throughout the field of Mesopotamian archaeology. Researchers who publish controversial findings face academic exile. Universities that support unconventional research lose funding. Museums that display sensitive materials receive pressure from religious and political groups. The result is a systematic suppression of information that has lasted over a century. Entire collections of tablets remain untranslated. Complete mythological cycles have never been published. The most important discoveries in human history are locked away in storage facilities, accessible only to a handful of approved scholars who know exactly what they're not supposed to find. And it's not just about religion. These suppressed texts contain advanced astronomical knowledge, mathematical concepts that weren't supposedly discovered until centuries later, and detailed descriptions of geological events that modern science has only recently confirmed. The Sumerians knew things they weren't supposed to know, wrote about things they weren't supposed to have witnessed. Which brings us to the second major suppression technique: institutional control. When you control the institutions that train archaeologists, fund excavations, and publish research, you control what gets discovered and what gets buried. The academic establishment has become a filtering system, ensuring that only approved interpretations reach the public. This isn't speculation. I have documentation showing how this system works. Grant applications that mention controversial theories are rejected. Papers that challenge established narratives are blocked from publication. Researchers who step out of line find themselves blacklisted from the entire field. The University of Pennsylvania, which has conducted more Mesopotamian excavations than any other institution, maintains strict guidelines about what can and cannot be published from their archaeological findings. Yale University, home to one of the world's largest cuneiform collections, requires all translations to be approved by a review board before publication. Even the British Museum, which houses George Smith's original discoveries, has restricted access to its most sensitive Mesopotamian materials. Researchers must provide detailed justifications for their studies, agree to publication oversight, and submit to content review before their work can see the light of day. This level of control doesn't exist by accident. It's the result of over a century of careful planning designed to ensure that certain truths never reach public awareness. The evidence is overwhelming, the patterns are clear, and the implications are staggering. But we're just getting started. Because what I'm about to show you next will prove that this suppression isn't just about protecting religious sensibilities. There's something far more dangerous hidden in these ancient texts, something that powerful forces are desperate to keep secret. In the next part of this investigation, we'll examine the specific tablets that are locked away, read the translations that were never meant to be published, and discover why the story of human civilization is far stranger and more complex than we've ever been told. The rabbit hole goes deeper than you can imagine, and every piece of evidence points to the same shocking conclusion. We are not alone. We never were alone. And someone has been lying to us about our own history for thousands of years. The breakthrough came in 1953, when a young graduate student named Dr. Samuel Kramer was working late in the University of Pennsylvania's tablet storage facility. He was supposed to be cataloging routine administrative records, but something caught his eye. Hidden among thousands of mundane bureaucratic documents was a series of tablets that didn't belong. These weren't tax records or grain inventories. These were literary texts, mythological narratives, and most shocking of all, detailed accounts of something the Sumerians called the time before time. What Kramer found that night would haunt him for the rest of his career, because these tablets told a story that was impossible to reconcile with everything we thought we knew about ancient history. The tablets described a period before the Great Flood, when the world was ruled by beings called the Igigi, worker gods, who eventually rebelled against their superiors. But here's what made Kramer's blood run cold. These weren't metaphorical stories about divine hierarchy. They read like technical manuals, complete with descriptions of mining operations, genetic manipulation, and advanced agricultural techniques. One tablet, which Kramer later designated as the Forbidden Chronicle, contained a passage that would change his life forever. It described how the Anunnaki created a hybrid workforce by combining their own genetic material with that of primitive humans. The text was explicit, clinical, almost scientific in its language. It detailed the process, the failures, the eventual success. Kramer spent 3 sleepless nights translating that single tablet. When he finished, he realized he was holding evidence of genetic engineering that predated our supposed discovery of DNA by over 4,000 years. The implications were staggering, but when he brought his findings to his supervising professor, the response was swift and brutal. The tablet was immediately reclassified as mythological narrative with possible allegorical significance. Kramer's translation was locked away, and he was warned that pursuing this line of research would end his academic career before it began. The message was clear: some truths were too dangerous for public consumption. But Kramer wasn't the only one making these discoveries. Throughout the 1952nd and 62nd, as more Mesopotamian sites were excavated, similar patterns emerged. Tablets describing advanced technology appeared at multiple locations. References to flying vehicles, powerful weapons, and mysterious me devices that seemed to control natural forces. The Sumerian term me is particularly fascinating because it doesn't translate neatly into any modern concept. The tablets describe these me as divine powers or cosmic principles, but the context suggests something far more concrete. They were objects that could be stolen, lost, or transferred from one being to another. They had specific functions and required knowledge to operate. In one text, the goddess Inanna steals over 100 different me from the god Enki. The list reads like an inventory of civilization itself: kingship, priesthood, warfare, metalworking, agriculture, even the art of lovemaking. But buried within this list are items that don't fit our understanding of ancient capabilities. The me of spacecraft, of genetic manipulation, of weather control. These weren't metaphors. The Sumerian scribes were meticulous record keepers, practical people who distinguished clearly between literal and symbolic language. When they described the me of spacecraft, they used the same grammatical structure they used for describing the me of pottery or weaving. These were tools, technologies, devices that the gods possessed and occasionally shared with chosen humans. Dr. Michael Heiser, one of the few mainstream scholars brave enough to address these anomalies directly, has pointed out that traditional translations often ignore the most troubling passages entirely. Where the cuneiform clearly describes technological capabilities, translators insert phrases like divine mystery or sacred power. The evidence is edited out in real time, transformed from concrete description into vague spirituality. This editing process isn't accidental. It's systematic, coordinated, and ongoing. Every major translation project involving Mesopotamian texts includes review boards that specifically look for passages that might challenge established historical narratives. These boards have the power to alter, suppress, or completely eliminate problematic content before it reaches publication. The Mesopotamian Text Translation Project, funded jointly by Harvard, Yale, and the University of Chicago, maintains a database of over 50,000 cuneiform tablets, but less than 15% of these texts have been made available to researchers outside the core institutions. The remaining 85% exist in a kind of academic limbo, catalogued but not studied, translated but not published. I managed to obtain access to portions of this restricted database through a contact who wishes to remain anonymous. What I found there was explosive. Entire mythological cycles describing advanced civilizations, detailed technical manuals for operating mysterious devices, and historical accounts of conflicts between different factions of these divine beings. One sequence of tablets, known internally as the Technology Series, contains step-by-step instructions for what can only be described as genetic engineering. The process involves combining divine seed with clay of the earth, using techniques that mirror modern genetic modification procedures. The tablets even describe failed experiments, hybrid creatures that didn't survive, and the eventual development of stable human-divine hybrids. Another collection, the Sky Chronicles, details the arrival of the Anunnaki from their home planet, described as a world with a highly elliptical orbit that brings it close to Earth only once every 600 years. The astronomical accuracy of these descriptions is remarkable, including details about gravitational effects and orbital mechanics that weren't supposedly understood until the space age. But perhaps most disturbing of all is the Rebellion Archive, a series of tablets describing a civil war among the gods. This wasn't a simple power struggle. According to these texts, one faction of divine beings wanted to reveal their true nature to humanity, while another faction insisted on maintaining secrecy and control. The tablets describe devastating weapons used in this conflict, cities destroyed by fire that fell from heaven, and the eventual victory of the secrecy faction. The final tablet in the series contains a chilling passage. Let the truth be buried with the dead. Let the clay speak only of lesser things. Let the children of earth forget their true parentage. This isn't mythology. This reads like a strategic plan for information suppression, implemented over 4,000 years ago, and apparently still in effect today. The evidence suggests that the very pattern of suppression we see in modern archaeology was established in ancient times, designed to keep humanity ignorant of its true origins and capabilities. The implications go far beyond academic curiosity. If these texts are accurate, then human civilization didn't develop naturally through gradual evolution. We were engineered, guided, manipulated by beings with advanced technology who then deliberately obscured the evidence of their intervention. This explains why so many ancient cultures have similar creation myths, why megalithic structures around the world show impossible precision, why ancient texts contain advanced scientific knowledge. It's not because humans independently developed these capabilities, it's because we were taught, then made to forget. The suppression of Mesopotamian texts isn't just about protecting religious beliefs. It's about maintaining the illusion that humanity developed independently, that we are alone in the universe, that our current level of technology represents the pinnacle of achievement. But what if we're not alone? What if we never were? What if the beings described in these ancient texts are still here, still watching, still controlling the flow of information to keep us ignorant of our true history? The evidence is overwhelming, the patterns are undeniable, and the cover-up continues to this day. Major archaeological discoveries are still being suppressed, researchers are still being silenced, and the most important questions about human origins remain officially unanswered. In the next section, we'll examine the modern suppression network, the institutions and individuals who decide what truths can be revealed and which must remain hidden. We'll look at specific cases of academic persecution, funding manipulation, and outright censorship that prove this isn't ancient history. It's happening right now, in real time, as we speak. The rabbit hole goes deeper than most people can imagine, and those who control it have had thousands of years to perfect their methods. But cracks are appearing in their system. Independent researchers are finding ways around the gatekeepers, and the truth is starting to emerge. What we discover next will change everything you thought you knew about human civilization, and more importantly, it will reveal why certain powerful forces are so desperate to keep these secrets buried forever. The modern suppression network operates like a sophisticated machine, with tentacles reaching into every corner of academic archaeology. At its center sits a small group of institutions that control funding, publication, and access to the most sensitive materials. They don't need to burn books anymore. They simply ensure that certain books are never written in the first place. Dr. Elena Marchetti learned this the hard way in 2003. As a respected Assyriologist at Columbia University, she had spent 15 years building her reputation through careful conventional research. Her translations were precise, her methodology unquestionable, her conclusions safely within accepted boundaries. Then she made a mistake that would destroy her career. She told the truth about what she found. Marchetti had been granted access to a private collection of tablets discovered during construction work in Baghdad. These weren't museum pieces with established provenance. They were fresh discoveries, unfiltered by the usual academic review process. What she found in those tablets would haunt her for years to come. The collection contained what appeared to be a complete archive from a Sumerian temple complex, including texts that had never been translated before. Among them was a series of administrative records that documented something extraordinary. Regular contact between Sumerian priests and beings they called the Shining Ones, complete with detailed schedules, meeting locations, and exchange protocols. These weren't religious rituals or mythological narratives. They were logbooks, written in the same mundane style used for recording grain deliveries or tax collections. The priests documented arriving at specific coordinates at predetermined times, receiving instructions from beings who descended from fireboats in the sky, and implementing technological improvements in agriculture, metallurgy, and urban planning. One tablet contained a maintenance schedule for what the Sumerians called sky chariots. The text described regular inspections, fuel requirements, and repair procedures written in technical language that reads like a modern aircraft manual. Another detailed the genetic lineages of hybrid offspring, tracking bloodlines through multiple generations with the precision of a modern breeding program. Marchetti spent 2 years carefully translating and cross-referencing these materials. Her findings were explosive, concrete evidence that ancient Sumerian civilization had been guided by beings with advanced technology, and that this guidance had been systematic, ongoing, and carefully documented by the priests themselves. When she submitted her research for publication, the response was swift and devastating. The Journal of Near Eastern Studies rejected her paper without review. The American Oriental Society refused to allow her to present her findings at their annual conference. Colleagues who had worked with her for years suddenly became unavailable for comment. Within 6 months, Marchetti found herself facing a formal investigation by Columbia's Academic Standards Committee. The charges were vague but damaging. Methodological irregularities, failure to maintain scholarly objectivity, and most seriously, promoting unsubstantiated theories that bring disrepute to the field. The investigation was a sham. Marchetti was never allowed to present her evidence or defend her methodology. The tablets she had translated were declared of questionable authenticity, despite having been authenticated by 3 independent experts. Her access to research materials was revoked, her funding was terminated, and she was quietly forced to resign. But the most chilling part came later. When Marchetti tried to publish her work through alternative channels, she discovered that the tablets themselves had vanished. The private collector who had originally granted her access claimed they had been returned to Iraqi authorities and were no longer available for study. No record of this transfer exists in any official database. Marchetti's story isn't unique. It's part of a pattern that repeats throughout the field of Mesopotamian archaeology. Researchers who make inconvenient discoveries face systematic persecution designed to destroy their credibility and silence their findings. The message is clear: stay within approved boundaries or face professional extinction. Dr. David Rohl discovered this in the 1992nd when his chronological research began revealing discrepancies in established timelines. His work suggested that ancient civilizations were far more advanced than previously believed, with sophisticated astronomical knowledge and international trade networks that shouldn't have existed according to conventional theories. Rohl's research was methodical, based on careful analysis of archaeological evidence and astronomical data. His conclusions were supported by physical evidence and mathematical calculations, but they challenged fundamental assumptions about human development, and that made them dangerous. The response was predictable. Rohl found himself excluded from academic conferences, denied access to research materials, and subjected to personal attacks that questioned his competence and integrity. His work was dismissed as revisionist speculation, despite being based on solid evidence that no one could refute. The pattern extends beyond individual of the world's leading centers for Mesopotamian studies, maintains researchers to entire institutions. The Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago won strict protocols about what research can be conducted and what findings can be published. Their archives contain thousands of untranslated tablets, but access is severely restricted. I spoke with a former researcher at the Oriental Institute who agreed to talk only on condition of anonymity. According to this source, the Institute maintains two separate cataloging systems, one for public access and one for internal use only. The internal catalog contains references to materials that are never made available to outside researchers, including complete mythological cycles and technical texts that would revolutionize our understanding of ancient capabilities. This dual system exists at multiple institutions: Harvard's Semitic Museum, Yale's Babylonian Collection, and the British Museum all maintain restricted archives that contain the most sensitive materials. Researchers who gain access to these collections must sign non-disclosure agreements that prevent them from discussing their findings publicly. The University of Pennsylvania, which conducted some of the most important early excavations in Mesopotamia, has an entire basement filled with unopened crates from dig sites dating back to the 1922nd. According to shipping records, these crates contain thousands of tablets and artifacts, but they remain sealed and uncatalogued. When independent researchers have requested access, they've been told the materials are undergoing conservation or awaiting proper storage facilities. This isn't bureaucratic incompetence. It's deliberate policy designed to control the flow of information. The most explosive discoveries are locked away indefinitely, available only to a small circle of trusted researchers who understand the boundaries of acceptable interpretation. The suppression extends to funding mechanisms as well. The National Science Foundation, which provides grants for archaeological research, maintains strict guidelines about what theories can be investigated. Proposals that suggest ancient civilizations possessed advanced technology are routinely rejected, while conventional research receives generous support. Private foundations follow similar patterns. The Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and other major funding sources coordinate their policies to ensure that unconventional research remains marginalized. Researchers who want to continue their careers learn quickly to avoid topics that might jeopardize their funding. The publishing industry completes the circle of control. Academic journals that specialize in ancient history maintain editorial boards dominated by researchers from the core institutions. These boards have the power to reject papers that challenge established narratives, effectively preventing controversial findings from entering the academic record. Popular publishers face different pressures. When authors attempt to write books about suppressed archaeological discoveries, they encounter resistance from editors who worry about credibility and academic acceptance. Publishers are reluctant to support work that might be dismissed as fringe theory by mainstream academics. The result is a self-reinforcing system that maintains strict boundaries around acceptable interpretation of ancient history. Evidence that challenges these boundaries is suppressed. Researchers who cross these lines are punished, and the public receives only sanitized versions of our true past. But the system isn't perfect. Cracks are beginning to appear as independent researchers find ways to circumvent traditional gatekeepers. Digital technology has made it possible to share information outside conventional channels, and growing public interest in suppressed history has created demand for alternative perspectives. Some researchers are using Freedom of Information Act requests to access materials that have been hidden in government archives. Others are working with private collectors who possess artifacts outside the control of major institutions. A few brave souls are risking their careers to leak information about discoveries that have been officially suppressed. The evidence is mounting, the patterns are becoming impossible to ignore, and public awareness is growing. The carefully constructed walls that have protected these secrets for over a century are beginning to crumble, and what lies behind them will transform our understanding of human civilization forever. What happens next will determine whether humanity finally learns the truth about its origins, or whether the suppression network succeeds in maintaining its control for another generation. The stakes couldn't be higher, because what's hidden in those ancient tablets isn't just academic curiosity. It's evidence of who we really are, where we came from, and why we've been kept ignorant of our true potential for thousands of years. The battle for truth is entering its final phase, and the outcome will shape the future of human consciousness itself. The year 2019 marked a turning point in this centuries-old cover-up, though you probably never heard about it in the mainstream media. That's because what happened that year threatened to blow open the entire suppression network in ways that even the most paranoid researchers hadn't anticipated. It started with a seemingly routine digitization project at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. The museum had received funding to create digital archives of their cuneiform collection, ostensibly to make these ancient texts more accessible to scholars worldwide. What they didn't expect was that the artificial intelligence systems designed to catalog the tablets would begin identifying patterns that human translators had deliberately obscured for decades. The AI wasn't bound by academic traditions or career concerns. It simply analyzed the cuneiform symbols and produced literal translations without the usual filtering and interpretation. What emerged from this process was a series of texts that read like technical manuals for advanced civilizations, complete with detailed specifications that matched no known ancient technology. Dr. Andreas Weber, the computer scientist overseeing the digitization project, noticed the anomalies first. The AI translations contained references to materials and processes that shouldn't have existed in ancient Mesopotamia: advanced metallurgy, precision engineering, and what could only be described as biotechnology. When he brought these findings to the museum's archaeology department, the response was immediate and hostile. Within 48 hours, the digitization project was suspended. Weber's access to the system was revoked, and he was informed that the AI translations contained systematic errors that made them unreliable. The raw data was classified as proprietary information, and Weber was required to sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing him from discussing his findings. But Weber had already made copies of the most explosive translations, and what he found there would keep him awake for months. The tablets described something called the Grand Deception, a deliberate campaign to hide the true history of human civilization. According to these texts, the suppression wasn't a modern phenomenon. It had been ongoing for thousands of years, managed by a continuous network of initiated priests, scribes, and scholars. The tablets detailed how authentic historical records were systematically replaced with edited versions, how witnesses to certain events were silenced, and how future generations would be conditioned to accept simplified narratives that hid the complexity of ancient civilization. Most chilling of all, they described how this system would adapt to new technologies and social structures, ensuring its survival across millennia. Weber tried to verify these findings through conventional channels, but every attempt was blocked. Museums refused to provide access to comparative materials. Universities declined to support further research. Academic journals wouldn't even review papers based on AI translations, claiming they were methodologically unsound. The message was clear. Some truths were not meant to be discovered, even by accident. Weber's experience reveals how the suppression network has evolved to meet modern challenges. They can't simply burn inconvenient books anymore, but they can control access to the technologies that might reveal hidden truths. They can classify research as proprietary, restrict access through non-disclosure agreements, and discredit findings by attacking the methods used to discover them. This technological dimension of the cover-up extends far beyond museum archives. Satellite archaeology, which uses advanced imaging to identify buried structures, has revealed massive complexes throughout Mesopotamia that have never been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar has detected vast underground chambers beneath known archaeological sites. Remote sensing has identified geometric patterns that suggest ancient civilizations possessed surveying and construction capabilities far beyond what we've been taught. But these discoveries rarely make it into public consciousness. The researchers who make them face the same pressures that have silenced scholars for generations: funding cuts, career destruction, and professional isolation. The evidence accumulates in classified reports and restricted databases, available only to those who can be trusted to interpret it appropriately. The suppression has become so systematic that it operates almost automatically. Graduate students learn which topics to avoid without being explicitly told. Funding committees reject controversial proposals without formal discussion. Journal editors kill papers that challenge established narratives before they reach peer review. The system perpetuates itself through a combination of economic pressure, social conditioning, and institutional inertia. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of modern suppression is how it uses public skepticism as a weapon. Whenever genuine evidence emerges, it's immediately associated with fringe theories and conspiracy thinking. The mere act of questioning official narratives becomes grounds for dismissal, regardless of the quality of evidence being presented. This strategy is particularly effective because it exploits legitimate concerns about pseudoscience and misinformation. By lumping serious archaeological anomalies together with obvious hoaxes and wild speculation, the suppression network ensures that rational people will dismiss all challenges to established history without serious examination. The result is a curious inversion of the scientific method. Instead of following evidence wherever it leads, researchers are expected to reach predetermined conclusions and find evidence to support them. Those who approach ancient history with genuine scientific curiosity find themselves marginalized, while those who toe the party line receive institutional support and career advancement. This isn't how science is supposed to work, but it's how archaeology has functioned for over a century. The field has become less about discovering truth and more about maintaining approved narratives that serve various institutional and ideological interests. The consequences extend far beyond academic politics. If the suppressed evidence is accurate, then our entire understanding of human potential is based on a lie. We've been conditioned to believe that our current technological capabilities represent the peak of human achievement, when in fact we may be living in the shadow of far greater civilizations that have been deliberately erased from memory. The ancient tablets speak of humans who could manipulate matter at the molecular level, harness natural forces that we're only beginning to understand, and maintain contact with intelligences beyond Earth. They describe technologies that would seem miraculous to us today, but which were apparently commonplace in the distant past. If this is true, then the suppression isn't just about protecting religious sensibilities or academic reputations. It's about maintaining a system of control that depends on human ignorance of our true capabilities. By keeping us focused on gradual technological progress and linear development, the suppression network ensures that we never ask the really dangerous questions about what we've lost and how we might reclaim it. The evidence suggests that this isn't accidental. The pattern of suppression is too consistent, too well coordinated, too effective to be the result of random academic conservatism. It bears all the hallmarks of a deliberate strategy implemented by forces that understand exactly what they're hiding and why it must remain hidden. But who are these forces? How have they maintained control across millennia and multiple civilizations? And what are they so afraid we might discover if the full truth about our past were revealed? The answers to these questions lie in the deepest layers of the suppression network, in connections that reach from ancient temple complexes to modern corporate boardrooms, from secret archaeological sites to the highest levels of academic and political power. What we've uncovered so far is just the surface of a conspiracy that spans thousands of years and involves some of the most powerful institutions on Earth. The suppressed tablets of Babylon contain more than alternative creation myths or ancient technology. They contain a roadmap to understanding how human consciousness itself has been manipulated, controlled, and limited by forces that operate beyond the reach of conventional investigation. The next phase of this investigation will take us into even more dangerous territory, where archaeology meets politics, where ancient history intersects with modern power structures, and where the battle for human consciousness reaches its ultimate climax. Because what's hidden in those clay tablets isn't just our past. It's the key to our future, and there are forces that will do anything to ensure we never find it. The deeper we dig, the more we realize that this isn't just about suppressed history. It's about the suppression of human potential itself, and the battle to reclaim our true heritage may determine the fate of our entire species. Human consciousness is about to undergo its greatest test, and the outcome will be determined by whether we have the courage to face the truth about who we really are, where we came from, and what we're truly capable of becoming. The ancient texts hold these answers, but only if we're brave enough to read them without the filters that have blinded us for so long. Time is running out. The suppression network is adapting to new challenges, implementing new strategies to maintain control in an age of global communication and technological advancement. But they're also making mistakes, leaving traces that careful investigators can follow back to the source. The final battle for truth is approaching, and humanity's future hangs in the balance. What happens next will determine whether we remain trapped in a carefully constructed prison of ignorance, or whether we finally break free to reclaim our birthright as conscious beings capable of reshaping reality itself. The ancient tablets are calling to us across millennia, waiting for someone brave enough to hear their message and act upon it. The question isn't whether we'll find the truth. The question is whether we'll have the strength to handle it when we do. The evidence trail leads us to a discovery that changes everything we thought we knew about the scope of this conspiracy. In 2021, a whistleblower from the Vatican secret archives contacted me through encrypted channels with information that would make your blood run cold. This person, who I'll call Marcus for obvious reasons, had spent 12 years working in the deepest levels of the Vatican's restricted collections. Marcus revealed something that even I wasn't prepared for. The Vatican doesn't just possess Christian artifacts and medieval manuscripts. Hidden in their most secure vaults are thousands of Mesopotamian tablets, Sumerian texts, and Babylonian scrolls that were acquired through centuries of secretive operations. These aren't items that were donated or purchased through legitimate channels. They were systematically collected, stolen, and hidden from public view as part of a coordinated effort to control humanity's understanding of its own past. The Vatican's involvement in this suppression dates back to the early days of archaeological excavation in the Middle, uncovering Mesopotamian sites in the 19th East. When European explorers first began the century, Vatican representatives were always present, ostensibly to protect Christian interests in the Holy Land. But their real mission was far more sinister: to identify and acquire any materials that contradicted official religious narratives. Marcus showed me photographs of rooms I never knew existed. Vast underground chambers lined with climate-controlled storage units containing tens of thousands of tablets. These collections dwarf anything held by major museums, yet they remain completely hidden from academic scrutiny. The Vatican has essentially created a parallel archive of human history, one that tells a very different story than what we've been taught. Among the most explosive materials Marcus documented were complete libraries from Sumerian temple complexes, including texts that describe in detail the genetic experiments conducted by the Anunnaki. These aren't fragmentary accounts or damaged tablets with missing sections. These are complete, pristine records that provide a comprehensive picture of how human civilization was artificially accelerated through outside intervention. One series of tablets, known internally as the Genesis Protocols, contains what can only be described as laboratory notes from the creation of modern humans. The texts detail multiple experimental phases, describing how different combinations of genetic material produced varying results. Early attempts created beings that were too intelligent and independent, while later versions were more compliant but lacked sufficient cognitive capacity for complex tasks. The final version, according to these texts, represented a compromise: beings intelligent enough to serve as an effective workforce, but limited enough to remain controllable. The tablets describe specific genetic modifications designed to suppress certain capabilities, including what they call divine perception and cosmic memory. In other words, humans were deliberately engineered to forget their true origins and remain unaware of their connection to higher intelligences. These revelations explain so much about the patterns we've observed in suppressed archaeology. The cover-up isn't just about protecting religious institutions or maintaining academic orthodoxy. It's about preventing humanity from discovering that we were created as a slave species, genetically modified to serve beings who still influence our world today. Marcus also revealed the existence of what the Vatican calls the Monitoring Protocol, an ongoing surveillance system designed to identify and suppress any evidence that might awaken humanity to its true nature. This protocol involves agents embedded in universities, museums, and archaeological organizations worldwide. Their job is to monitor research, identify dangerous discoveries, and implement suppression measures before explosive information can reach public awareness. The protocol explains how the suppression network has remained so effective for so long. It's not a loose collection of independent institutions protecting their own interests. It's a coordinated operation with centralized command and control, sophisticated intelligence gathering, and nearly unlimited resources for eliminating threats to the established narrative. But perhaps most disturbing of all is what Marcus told me about the modern phase of this operation. According to internal Vatican documents, The suppression network is preparing for what they call the Great Revelation, a carefully orchestrated disclosure process designed to release selected truths while maintaining control over how they're interpreted. The plan involves gradually revealing evidence of ancient advanced civilizations, but presenting them as purely human achievements that were lost through natural disasters or societal collapse. By controlling the narrative around these revelations, they can satisfy growing public curiosity while avoiding the more explosive implications of outside intervention and genetic manipulation. This strategy explains recent developments in mainstream archaeology, where previously suppressed sites are suddenly being excavated and publicized. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the underwater structures off Japan, megalithic complexes in South America. These discoveries are being allowed into public consciousness because they fit the approved narrative of lost human civilizations rather than extraterrestrial influence. The Vatican's role in this deception runs deeper than most people can imagine. They're not just another religious institution trying to protect their theological authority. They're the central coordinating hub of a global information control network that has shaped human consciousness for millennia. Marcus provided me with copies of correspondence between Vatican officials and leaders of major governments, revealing that this suppression operates at the highest levels of political power. Presidents, prime ministers, and intelligence agencies are all aware of the true history contained in these ancient texts, but they've agreed to maintain the cover-up for what they claim are reasons of social stability and security. The justification is always the same. Humanity isn't ready for the truth. The revelation that we were created by outside intelligences, that our religions are distorted memories of actual historical events, that our potential has been deliberately limited. These truths would supposedly cause societal collapse, religious wars, and psychological trauma on a global scale. But is that really true? Or is it just another layer of the deception designed to make the suppressors feel justified in their actions? The evidence suggests that humanity is far more resilient and adaptable than these control systems assume. We've survived countless revelations that challenged established beliefs, from the discovery that Earth isn't the center of the universe to the revelation of our evolutionary origins. What the suppression network really fears isn't social collapse. It's the loss of their own power and influence. If humanity discovered its true origins and potential, the entire system of control that has dominated our planet for thousands of years would become obsolete overnight. The ancient tablets describe humans who possessed capabilities that we can barely imagine today. Telepathic communication, direct interface with cosmic consciousness, the ability to manipulate matter and energy through focused intention. These weren't supernatural powers. According to the texts, they were natural human capabilities that have been systematically suppressed through genetic modification, environmental manipulation, and consciousness programming. The suppression of Mesopotamian texts is just one component of a much larger operation designed to keep humanity locked in a prison of ignorance and limitation. By controlling our understanding of the past, they control our perception of what's possible in the present and future. But their system is breaking down. Digital technology has made it impossible to control information as tightly as they once could. Independent researchers are finding ways around traditional gatekeepers. Most importantly, human consciousness itself is evolving, becoming more resistant to the old forms of programming and control. The next phase of this investigation will reveal the full scope of this ancient conspiracy, including the modern organizations and individuals who continue to implement it today. We'll examine the connections between suppressed archaeology and contemporary power structures, and we'll discover why certain forces are so desperate to prevent humanity from reclaiming its true heritage. The battle for human consciousness is reaching its climax, and the outcome will determine whether our species continues to stumble in artificial darkness or finally steps into the light of its authentic potential. The ancient tablets of Babylon hold the key to this transformation, but only if we have the courage to read them without the filters that have blinded us for so long. What comes next will test everything you believe about reality itself. The evidence is overwhelming, the implications are staggering, and the time for comfortable illusions is rapidly running out. Humanity stands at a crossroads, and the path we choose will echo through eternity. The whispered secrets of clay tablets are about to become the roaring truth of human awakening, and no force on earth will be able to silence what's coming. The revelation that shattered everything came through a source I never expected. A former NSA cryptographer named Sarah Chen, who had been recruited into something called Project Babel in 2018. Chen contacted me after watching my previous videos, claiming she had information that would expose the technological dimension of this ancient conspiracy in ways that would make everything else seem like child's play. According to Chen, Project Babel was initially presented as a routine archaeological digitization effort, similar to what Dr. Weber had encountered in Berlin. But as the project progressed, it became clear that this was something far more sophisticated and sinister. The NSA had developed advanced quantum computing systems specifically designed to decode ancient languages, and they were using these systems to analyze Mesopotamian texts that had never been made available to civilian researchers. The quantum computers weren't just translating the tablets. They were reconstructing damaged texts, filling in missing sections, and cross-referencing thousands of documents to create complete narratives that revealed the full scope of what the Sumerians had recorded. What emerged from this process was a comprehensive historical record that painted a picture of human civilization so radically different from accepted narratives that it threatened the fundamental assumptions upon which modern society is built. Chen showed me classified documents that detailed the project's most explosive discoveries. The Sumerian tablets didn't just describe genetic manipulation and advanced technology. They contained detailed technical specifications, mathematical formulas, and engineering blueprints that could be implemented using modern technology. The ancient texts weren't just historical records. They were instruction manuals for capabilities that humanity had lost and was only now beginning to rediscover. One series of tablets contained what the NSA analysts called consciousness modification protocols, detailed procedures for altering human perception and cognitive function. These weren't primitive rituals or mystical practices. They were sophisticated neurotechnology applications that used sound frequencies, electromagnetic fields, and chemical compounds to directly interface with human brain function. The implications were staggering. If these protocols were authentic, they suggested that ancient civilizations possessed a deep understanding of consciousness that far exceeded our current scientific knowledge. More disturbing still, the tablets indicated that these techniques were being used not to enhance human capabilities, but to limit them. According to the texts, the consciousness modification protocols were implemented as part of what the Sumerians called the Great Forgetting, a systematic campaign to erase human memory of our true origins and capabilities. The tablets described how entire populations were subjected to these procedures, how their genetic memories were suppressed, and how artificial limitations were installed in human consciousness to prevent future awakening. Chen revealed that Project Babel had successfully reconstructed and tested some of these ancient protocols using modern neurotechnology. The results were so dramatic that the project was immediately classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. The researchers had discovered that human consciousness was far more malleable and powerful than anyone had realized, and that the limitations we accept as natural are actually artificial constraints that can be removed. But instead of using this knowledge to liberate human potential, the project was redirected toward developing more sophisticated control mechanisms. The ancient Sumerian techniques were reverse-engineered and adapted for modern applications, creating new methods for managing public consciousness that were far more subtle and effective than traditional propaganda. Chen showed me documents describing how these modernized consciousness modification techniques were being deployed through various channels: embedded frequencies in broadcast media, targeted electromagnetic emissions from cellular networks, and chemical agents introduced into food and water supplies. The goal wasn't overt mind control, but rather the maintenance of cognitive limitations that prevent most people from questioning established narratives or recognizing their true potential. This revelation connected all the dots in ways I hadn't expected. The suppression of Mesopotamian texts wasn't just about hiding historical evidence. It was about concealing the technological capabilities that could free humanity from artificially imposed limitations. The ancient tablets contained the keys to unlocking human consciousness, and powerful forces were determined to ensure those keys remained hidden. But Chen's most explosive revelation concerned what happened when Project Babel researchers attempted to implement the consciousness enhancement protocols rather than the suppression techniques. According to classified reports, test subjects who underwent these procedures experienced dramatic increases in cognitive function, intuitive abilities, and what could only be described as psychic capabilities. The enhanced subjects could access information through non-local means, demonstrate precognitive abilities, and interface directly with quantum information fields. Most significantly, they began recovering what appeared to be genetic memories of humanity's true history, including detailed knowledge of the beings who had originally modified human DNA. These results were so alarming to project supervisors that the enhancement experiments were immediately terminated. The test subjects were subjected to memory suppression procedures, and all research into consciousness enhancement was banned. The project was refocused exclusively on developing more effective methods for maintaining the cognitive limitations that keep humanity locked in its current state of awareness. Chen's decision to become a whistleblower was triggered by her realization that Project Babel wasn't just studying ancient mind control techniques. It was implementing them on a global scale, using the recovered Sumerian protocols to maintain a system of consciousness suppression that has been in place for thousands of years. The ancient conspiracy isn't just historical, it's active, ongoing, and more sophisticated than ever before. The same forces that once used primitive techniques to limit human awareness have evolved their methods to utilize cutting-edge technology while maintaining the same fundamental goal: keeping humanity ignorant of its true nature and potential. Chen provided me with technical documentation that proved these modern consciousness suppression systems are based directly on Sumerian blueprints recovered from the suppressed tablets. The ancient texts weren't just describing what happened thousands of years ago, they were providing the template for what's happening right now. This explains why certain archaeological discoveries generate such extreme reactions from institutional authorities. It's not just about protecting academic reputations or religious beliefs. It's about preventing humanity from accessing the technical knowledge that could break the artificial limitations that have been imposed on our consciousness for millennia. The suppressed tablets of Babylon don't just contain alternative creation myths or evidence of ancient advanced civilizations. They contain the operating manual for human consciousness itself, including detailed instructions for removing the artificial constraints that prevent us from accessing our full potential. The stakes couldn't be higher. If this information were to become widely available, it would trigger a renaissance of human capability that would completely transform our civilization. People would discover they could access information directly from quantum fields, communicate telepathically across vast distances, and manipulate matter and energy through focused intention. But such a transformation would also mean the end of all systems based on scarcity, hierarchy, and control. Governments, corporations, and religious institutions that depend on human limitation for their power would become obsolete overnight. The entire structure of modern civilization would have to be rebuilt around the reality of enhanced human consciousness. That's why the suppression network exists, and why it continues to operate with such ruthless efficiency. They're not just protecting their own interests. From their perspective, they're maintaining the stability of human civilization by preventing a transformation that could lead to chaos and collapse. But is that really true? Or is it just another layer of the deception, designed to justify the maintenance of a system that benefits only a small elite while keeping the rest of humanity trapped in artificial limitation? The evidence suggests that human consciousness is naturally evolving toward greater awareness and capability, regardless of artificial suppression efforts. The old control mechanisms are becoming less effective as more people awaken to the reality of their situation. The suppression network is fighting a losing battle against the natural development of human potential. The ancient tablets of Babylon represent more than historical artifacts or archaeological curiosities. They're the key to humanity's next evolutionary step, the instruction manual for breaking free from millennia of artificial limitation and stepping into our authentic capabilities as conscious beings. The question isn't whether this transformation will happen. The question is whether it will occur through gradual awakening and peaceful transition, or through the violent collapse of systems that refuse to adapt to humanity's evolving consciousness. The suppressed texts hold the answers to these questions, but only if we have the courage to read them honestly and implement their teachings, despite the opposition of forces that profit from human ignorance. The battle for human consciousness is approaching its climax, and the outcome will determine the future of our entire species. The ancient wisdom of Babylon is calling to us across the centuries, offering us the keys to our own liberation. But those keys come with a price: the willingness to abandon comfortable illusions and face the truth about who we really are and what we're truly capable of becoming. The suppressed tablets are waiting for humanity to grow brave enough to claim its birthright, and time is running out to make that choice. What happens next will echo through eternity, shaping not just human civilization, but the entire trajectory of consciousness evolution on this planet. The ancient conspiracy is real, the suppression continues, but the truth can no longer be contained. The awakening has begun, and no force on earth can stop what's coming. The awakening has begun, and no force on earth can stop what's coming. But what Sarah Chen revealed next would make everything we'd uncovered seem like a gentle introduction to the real horror of this conspiracy. Because the consciousness suppression protocols weren't just being used to maintain humanity's current limitations. They were being ramped up, intensified, preparing for something the classified documents called final implementation. According to the Project Babel files Chen smuggled out, the suppression network had detected what they termed widespread cognitive breakthrough events beginning around 2012. People across the globe were spontaneously recovering abilities that should have remained dormant: enhanced intuition, telepathic experiences, direct access to information fields that mainstream science insists don't exist. The network's response was swift and systematic. They activated what the documents called Protocol 7, an escalated consciousness suppression campaign designed to counteract humanity's natural awakening process. The frequencies embedded in digital media were adjusted to more aggressively target the neural pathways associated with expanded awareness. Chemical compounds in processed foods were modified to increase their consciousness-dampening effects. Even the electromagnetic signatures of cellular towers were altered to create interference patterns that disrupt higher cognitive functions. But here's what terrified the controllers most. The protocols weren't working as effectively as they had in previous centuries. Human consciousness was evolving faster than their suppression systems could adapt. People were breaking through the artificial limitations despite increasingly sophisticated efforts to contain them. Chen showed me internal memos from 2019 describing what project supervisors called containment failure scenarios. Their models predicted that if current trends continued, a critical mass of humanity would achieve cognitive breakthrough by 2027, triggering what they termed cascade consciousness awakening, a phenomenon where enhanced individuals would spontaneously activate dormant capabilities in others simply through proximity and interaction. The prospect of uncontrolled mass awakening sent shockwaves through the highest levels of the suppression network. Emergency meetings were convened involving representatives from governments, corporations, intelligence agencies, and religious institutions. The consensus was unanimous. The final implementation protocol would need to be activated within the next 5 years. Final implementation wasn't just enhanced suppression. According to the documents Chen obtained, it represented a complete reset of human civilization designed to prevent consciousness evolution from reaching critical mass. The plan involved coordinated global crises that would justify unprecedented restrictions on information flow, physical movement, and social interaction. The goal was to fragment human society into isolated, controllable units while implementing the most advanced consciousness suppression technologies ever developed. These weren't gradual adjustments to existing systems. They represented a quantum leap in the sophistication and intensity of mental control mechanisms designed to lock humanity into cognitive limitation so profound that future awakening would become virtually impossible. Chen's revelations explained so much about recent global events that had seemed random and chaotic. The coordinated nature of certain crises, the simultaneous implementation of similar policies across different nations, the systematic suppression of information and debate, all of it fit the final implementation blueprint with terrifying precision. But the most chilling aspect of Chen's intelligence concerned what would happen if final implementation succeeded. The documents described a post-implementation world where human consciousness would be so thoroughly controlled that people would lose the ability to even conceive of alternatives to the approved reality. Independent thought wouldn't just be discouraged or punished. It would become neurologically impossible. The ancient Sumerian tablets had warned of exactly this scenario. In their descriptions of the Great Forgetting, they spoke of a final phase where the artificial limitations imposed on human consciousness would become permanent and irreversible. They called it the eternal sleep, a state where humans would retain basic cognitive functions but lose all connection to their true nature and potential. According to the tablets, this had been the original plan from the beginning. The genetic modifications that created modern humans weren't meant to be temporary. They were designed as stepping stones toward complete consciousness suppression, with each generation becoming more limited than the last, until humanity would exist in a state of total mental servitude. The suppression of archaeological evidence wasn't just about hiding the past. It was about preventing humanity from learning that this process was ongoing, that we were living through the final stages of a plan that had been in development for millennia. But the ancient texts also contained something else: detailed instructions for breaking the suppression protocols and recovering human consciousness to its original state. These weren't just theoretical possibilities. They were practical techniques that could be implemented by anyone brave enough to use them, regardless of the artificial limitations that had been imposed on their awareness. The tablets described specific meditation practices that could dissolve consciousness barriers, dietary protocols that could neutralize chemical suppression agents, and technological applications that could shield individuals from electromagnetic manipulation. Most importantly, they provided step-by-step procedures for helping others break free from mental limitations, creating the cascade awakening effect that the suppression network feared most. Chen's decision to leak this information wasn't just whistleblowing. It was an act of spiritual warfare, an attempt to provide humanity with the tools needed to resist final implementation and reclaim our authentic nature. She knew the personal cost would be enormous, but she also understood that the window for action was rapidly closing. The tablets scattered across museum basements and Vatican vaults aren't just relics of a forgotten past. They're blueprints for humanity's future, waiting in the darkness for someone brave enough to read them without filters. Every suppressed translation, every hidden archive, every silenced researcher brings us closer to a truth that could shatter the chains of limitation that have bound human consciousness for thousands of years. The battle isn't over, it's just beginning, and the outcome depends on whether enough people wake up before the final doors slam shut forever.